Hello, my name's Louis and I'm coordinator of our archaeological project at St Dominic Sixth Form College. In this short video I'm going to take you on a short tour of the site and explain some of the archaeological features that we have discovered through our excavation, which is now run over 3 years. We began the project in 2019. I think about 80 students so far have been part of the project excavation. So yeah, we're going to take you on a little tour of the site and explain some of the core features and details of the building and what we discovered through the archaeology. So we're stood on top of the earthen mound, which photographic evidence demonstrates the tower, at least in one phase of its building, stood upon, probably the 18th century folly that you can see in this image here. We had a few questions about the nature and origins or construction of the mound. One that was put forward to us by AOC archaeologists was that potentially the mound was constructed only after the tower had been demolished, and therefore that it comprised entirely of the demolition rubble of the tower that you can see in this photograph here. However, recent developments, including this photograph, and in fact also our discovering the traces of these steps on the side of the mound, clearly demonstrate that the tower that you see here and the tower that we have the foundational remains of stood on this mound, and this mound existed in situ when that tower was actually upright. So in this trench we have located one of the original foundation walls, probably representing foundation walls for the folly phase of the building, approximately, which can be dated to the 18th century. The wall line follows we followed the line of the foundations of the walls, which we can see already exposed and above the ground, though it did take more of a severe curve or trajectory than we expected. The wall's been dated by historic building specialists from AOC Archaeology to being no later than around 1780, so the top end of the 18th century. Carolina, what are the dimensions of the bricks and the colours?
Yeah, so based on our measurements, the radius of the whole tower itself is 3.4 meters, and the bricks that the wall is made up of are red and yellow, and the wall is 1.5 bricks thick at the surface, and the red bricks measure 228 millimeters by 104 millimeters by 67 millimeters, while the yellow bricks are 225 millimeters by 110 millimeters and by 67 millimeters.
We were quite surprised when we originally exposed the wall how relatively small it is for a tower that, from images show, stood at about 20 to 30 foot high. So you'd expect foundation walls to be a lot more substantial. In fact, this is only about 1.5 to 2 bricks thick. And actually, from some of the photos, you can see the subsidence that the sisters who ran the convent school were concerned about, because the building had begun to shift worryingly and dangerously towards the school building. And actually, in this trench here, Carolina can maybe just point there, they had attempted to prop up the wall and the foundations with 2 later concrete plinths either side of this wall, right, which you can see along a kind of severe crack in the foundations. So indeed, the tower had become structurally unsound. So as I suggested, I believe, in one of the earlier clips, one of the things we're looking to discern through the archaeology as we go on with the project is the relationship between the mound, the folly phase of the building, which we can see the structural remains of, and the historical references that strongly imply that there was some kind of structure feature here during the 16th century, which correlates with the Spanish Armada crisis. So whether or not there was simply a quite simple fire basket erected on a mound here as part of that warning signal system, or whether or not there was in fact, as historical sources suggest, an elaborate Elizabethan, Spanish and Armada era beacon tower or structure. So far the archaeology in terms of the structural remains hasn't necessarily been enabled us to confirm that there wasn't a building here of Elizabethan date. So we've opened up this larger trench to hopefully, where possible and safely, to get down beyond these 18th century walls to consider whether or not this 18th century brick bond building is stood on top of an earlier Elizabethan foundations. Certainly the small finds, the material finds, pottery, as well as really recently a 15th, 16th century signet ring, do imply that the site was occupied during the 15th and 16th century, but we're hoping here to either get down to a floor surface that may be give us an earlier date or an earlier phase of building fabric. Unfortunately, or on the side of the building here, curving around the foundations there, to protect or preserve the heritage, or indeed either to support the foundations, a later concrete fascia was placed over the side of the wall, which means it's necessary for us now to excavate inside the tower down to see if there is earlier building, brickwork evident of Tudor building here. So in the first year of excavation, so back in 2019, we actually decided to place a test bit beyond what we expected to be the perimeter or radius of the tower itself, and we actually found the edge of this darker red brick feature. Only the edge of it though, and then obviously COVID happened and we had to pack down the trenches. When we came back, we decided to explore this feature in a little bit more detail, which represents a building, potentially a chimney, furnace, red oven, brick building. You know, there's lots of evidence also of metal manufacturing on site. The contents of the chimney feature, which we had actually excavated all the way down to the ground, was full of lots of
materials, charcoal.
Yeah, like cinders, charcoal, lots of evidence of metal manufacturing, bits of crucible as well. The walls or exterior, which you can't see but we'll probably put some images, also show evidence of high temperature and burning, which again supports some kind of industrial manufacturing happening just outside, potentially just building the bricks to build the tower on site itself. There's a lot of natural clay throughout the site where they could have built bricks or manufactured bricks and other materials on site itself. Do you have some of the dimensions of this? I mean, the bricks themselves, they're a bit later than the bricks that we see over there, aren't we?
Yeah, they date to around 1820.
Yeah.
And they measure 224 millimetres by 104 millimetres by 67.
Yeah, so as I say, it's likely that this is obviously consistent with the tower, but perhaps built slightly later than the folly that we see over there. More recently, we've extended this trench in this direction to establish the full size of this chimney or oven feature, and we did establish that it ends just where Anastasia is here, and we preserved the collapse, which shows lots of that burnt material within it. Beyond where Leisha's now digging, we found, as I say, the periphery of this feature, but then Leisha, we've discovered a few more features, perhaps a bit later.
Yeah, so we think this is later because it's higher to the ground level than this part. On either side there's brickwork, and we think that this is, how would you call it?
I think it's like a Victorian era drainage pipe.
Yeah, drainage, so the contents inside of it, we're still excavating. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we're quite interested in this because we want to establish its relationship with not only this external feature, but whether or not actually it runs and connects back to the tower, so whether or not that pipe does run and connect back to the tower. So at some point we'll probably extend this trench either side in direction there to establish a relationship with this feature, the chimney, and also actually to the tower itself.
Local legend suggests that the grain grown in Harrow was so good that Queen Elizabeth I had all of her bread made from it, and that locals of Harrow were exempt from taxes as a reward. A map from 1763 shows a windmill right next to our tower. The same windmill that is cited as part of a legal dispute between the Vicar of Harrow and Edward Flambard.
We have discovered a lead alloy weight which may have been used in the sale of grain. It has incised lines on it, which may indicate its weight value, and is from the post-medieval period. Likewise, one of the 2 windmills atop the hill can be dated to the medieval period.
There are several local legends surrounding the history, origins and function of St Dominic's Tower, but perhaps the most enchanting of all is that of Prior William Bolton, and that is where our story begins. Prior Bolton was the prior of St Bartholomew's in the City of London and the parish rector of Harrow between the years of 1522 and 1532, and he was known to be quite the prolific builder.
As well as this, he was also a very superstitious man, and he was convinced by soothsayers and astrologists that the Thames would burst its banks and engulf all of London. So he and some of his followers retreated to the top part of Harrow-on-the-hill, where they built a tower to sit the flood out. They even went as far as to bring boats and provisions with them.
Fortunately for Bolton and the rest of 16th century London, the Thames did not burst its banks, and the boats that they brought up with them were not for use.
While this story has been rebuked by historians, it is still a very interesting tale about the origins of the tower, and it shows the intrigue that historical monuments like our tower have.
The tower has often been referred to as an Elizabethan beacon, and it is claimed that it was part of a sophisticated signal system that stretched across the length of the country. It was used to alert Queen Elizabeth I and the government of a potential invasion from Philip II during the crisis of the Spanish Armada in 1588. In some of our photographic archives, we can see a large fire basket or cresset that can be seen at the top of the tower. We may have discovered parts of the fire basket in our chimney excavation. In order to send a signal, the watchman would have lit a highly flammable rope that even in wet conditions would still be able to burn. Once receiving this signal, neighbouring beacon towers would then in turn light their own signal until all 4,000 beacon towers would be lit to alert the Queen of danger.
All former stories aside, our archaeological work on the remains of the tower, combined with a historic building survey,
suggests 18th to 19th century construction.
Given the likely date of the tower, combined with its peculiar faux antique design, it is more plausible to suggest that the structure was originally built or later repurposed as a folly, with no intended function beyond aesthetic charm that it added to the estate.
However, the tower did go on to have a more practical function. It is alleged that the Duke of Wellington used to stay in it. Furthermore, it also became a sleeping quarter for visiting priests and also the first building on site, which was used as a temporary schoolhouse, which the convent school opened in 1878.